Imagine a massive, overly crowded poker table.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and everyone is shouting, right. Nobody trusts the person sitting next to them. Everyone's, hiding cards up their sleeves.
Sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. And sitting right dead in the middle of the felt, right in the center, is a loaded gun.
Wow.
The author of today's source material says that loaded gun is Iran's nuclear program.
Right.
And as of April 2026, the entire Middle East is basically one accidental bump of the table away from that gun going off.
It is a terrifying visual, honestly.
Yeah.
But it really accurately captures the geopolitical reality we're looking at today.
For sure. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking something really intense for you today.
We really are. We're examining a highly detailed, incredibly ambitious diplomatic blueprint.
Yeah, it was published recently under the pseudonym Barack Face.
Right, which is quite the internet culture pen name.
It really is.
But despite that, the author establishes their credentials right away. They note that they were Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Which is a very specific credential to drop.
Exactly. So, we're looking at the work of someone deeply entrenched in political mobilization, strategy, and high-stakes negotiation.
Right. This isn't just a casual op-ed that someone fired off on a weekend.
Not at all.
It is a really dense, pragmatic roadmap. The premise here is that the Middle East is, quite literally, standing on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, the text paints a very stark picture for you.
We all see the proxy conflicts, right? They are burning like underground wildfires across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen.
Everywhere, basically.
Everywhere. But this author is putting forward a very specific, bold argument here.
Which is that a purely military solution to the Iran crisis is impossible. Period.
Period. End of sentence. They argue that a comprehensive political solution is not just some, idealistic preference.
Right.
It is the absolute only exit strategy available that doesn't end in a global economic catastrophe.
And before we get into the actual anatomy of this blueprint for you listening.
The nuts and bolts of it.
Exactly. Before we talk about who sits at the table, what the rules are, how you dismantle a regime's ideological cage without collapsing the state.
Which is a huge task.
A massive task.
Yeah.
But we need to establish a very clear baseline for our discussion today.
Oh, absolutely. This is crucial.
The framework we are dissecting involves regime transition, entrenched geopolitical rivalries, and radical diplomatic shifts. It's heavily charged.
Extremely charged. So as always, we want to remind you that we are looking at this purely as analysts.
Yes, we aren't endorsing this roadmap.
We aren't taking a Western, Eastern, left-wing, or right-wing perspective on it at all.
Our goal is strictly to tear down the engine of this proposal, lay the parts out on the floor, and understand exactly how the author believes this machine could actually work.
Right. We are just the mechanics today. We're just pointing at the gears so you can see how they fit together.
Exactly. So let's look at that engine. The author starts by diagnosing why they believe military might is a total dead end.
Right. And they bring up the Strait of Hormuz. We all know the tension there, right? We know it's the main artery for global oil and liquefied natural gas.
It's an economic choke point.
A huge one. But the author argues that Iran treats it like a geopolitical hostage. And in that kind of environment, war becomes, quote, less a decision than a drift.
Drift is such a deliberate word choice there.
I really want to unpack that word drift because usually, we think of war as a very deliberate choice.
Right, someone sitting in a situation room making a call.
Exactly. A head of state pushing a button or signing a declaration.
Which is an outdated way of looking at modern asymmetric conflict. The drift is all about friction and proximity.
Friction.
When you have U.S. carrier strike groups, Iranian fast attack boats, proxy militias, and commercial supertankers, all operating in the same narrow, high-tension waterways.
It's just too crowded.
It's way too crowded. You don't need a formal declaration of war to start one. The author is talking about the terrifying reality of miscalculation.
Just one mistake.
One misread radar signature. An automated defense system interpreting a commercial drone as a military threat.
Or a targeted strike that accidentally takes out a Russian or Chinese asset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a localized skirmish drifts into an uncontrollable regional inferno.
Nobody pushed the big red button.
No one pushed it, but the region burns anyway.
Okay, I buy the danger of the drift. That makes total sense. But let me push back on the author's main thesis here for a second. The illusion of the military solution.
Go for it.
Let's say the U.S. and Israel decide they've had enough. They don't drift, right? They act decisively.
Okay.
They execute a flawless surgical military campaign. They crater the centrifuge halls. They wipe out the missile factories. They totally decapitate the command nodes of the IRGC.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, yes.
Right. They achieve total, unquestionable tactical victory. Why does the author argue that this still fails?
Because, simply put, tactical victory is not strategic resolution.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you just described a massive degradation of hardware and personnel. And you can bomb a centrifuge facility into dust, sure.
Right, you can destroy the buildings.
But you cannot bomb the knowledge of nuclear physics out of the minds of Iranian scientists.
Ah, okay.
You can collapse the economy and terrify the population, but as this blueprint states, military action cannot manufacture legitimacy.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like trying to cure a systemic infection by just packing the patient in ice.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, like you drop the fever, you stop the immediate shivering, which in this case is equivalent to destroying the weapons factories, but the infection is still right there in the bloodstream.
Exactly. The fever spikes again the second the ice melts.
Because the underlying issue wasn't treated.
Right. And that underlying infection is the internal political crisis of the regime itself. It's trapped inside this broader geopolitical confrontation.
So bombing doesn't fix the political crisis.
Not at all. You cannot produce a durable regional security architecture through airstrikes alone.
It just doesn't work.
If you just bomb the infrastructure, you leave behind a wounded, humiliated, and highly motivated regime.
Who will just start over?
They will simply rebuild the program deeper underground, and likely with even less international oversight this time.
So if bombing the fever doesn't cure the infection, the author says diplomacy is the, quote, language of survival.
Yes.
But, you know, we've seen endless diplomatic summits fail. Vienna, Doha, years and years of closed-door meetings that just end in shredded agreements.
We have.
The author obviously knows this, which is why they completely rewrite the rules of the negotiation here.
They throw the old rule book out the window.
Completely. Let's look at who actually gets an invite to this proposed summit. It's a very specific guest list for you to consider.
It really is.
We have the United States, Iran, Israel, the European Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the BRICS nations, and Reza Pahlavi.
It's a fascinating assembly, mostly because it acknowledges the reality of a multipolar world.
Right. It's not just the West dictating terms.
Exactly. Western diplomats often fall into the trap of thinking they are the only relevant negotiators in the room. But Iran has spent the last decade building massive economic and military partnerships with Russia and China.
They aren't isolated.
No, they have options. This blueprint recognizes that Iran is not going to sign a survival-level regime-altering deal if it feels that deal is being dictated solely by Washington and Brussels.
Which totally explains why BRICS is there. By bringing Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa to the table, you provide Iran with a geopolitical guarantor.
Exactly.
It's not a Western surrender demand, it's a global consensus.
Precisely. And the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, is there because Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the rest of the Gulf states are the ones physically in the crosshairs of Iran's proxy network.
They're literally in the line of fire.
Right. So they have to be satisfied with the security guarantees. But, as you were probably about to say, the most radical inclusion is Reza Pahlavi.
Yes. I was going to bring him up. Honestly, I struggle with this one a bit when I read the source.
It's a bold move.
It is. Reza Pahlavi is the son of the deposed Shah. Why is his presence mandatory at this table? Isn't there a massive risk that putting him at the table just turns the summit into a complete non-starter for the current regime?
It's a risk, for sure.
Why would the Supreme Leader's representatives ever agree to sit across from him?
It's a massive risk. But the author argues it is a necessary one. Pahlavi is included not necessarily as a monarch in waiting, you know.
Okay, then as what?
As the most internationally recognized unifying symbol of the Iranian democratic opposition and the diaspora.
Ah, so he's a symbol.
Right. The logic here is that if you only negotiate with the current regime, you are completely ignoring the millions of Iranians who've been protesting in the streets for years.
You're ignoring the actual people.
Exactly. Any deal that ignores the populace is just a temporary ceasefire for the ruling elite. It doesn't cure that systemic infection we talked about. Pahlavi represents the public's demand for transition.
Okay, I see. And the author insists on principles only.
Yes, this is a very strict rule.
No low-level deputies who have to run it up the flagpole. Foreign ministers and presidents only.
People who actually have the immediate authority to sign their names and bind their governments right then and there.
No calling home to check. But the venue choice is what really caught my eye.
Oh, the venue is brilliant.
They want this to happen in New Delhi, India. Why Delhi? Why not Geneva or Oslo? I mean, Switzerland has been the gold standard for neutral diplomacy for a century.
Switzerland is neutral, yes. But in the eyes of Tehran, Moscow, or Beijing, Geneva is still fundamentally Western turf.
Oh, interesting.
It carries the baggage of a Eurocentric worldview. India, on the other hand, offers a totally different diplomatic gravity.
How so?
Well, think about it. New Delhi is arguably the only capital on Earth right now that maintains highly pragmatic, functional relationships with every single actor on that guest list.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's true.
India buys Russian oil. It has deep technological and strategic ties with the U.S. and Israel. It has historical trade ties with Iran. And it is a founding member of BRICS.
It's the ultimate geopolitical fulcrum.
Exactly. Delhi isn't going to write the script to favor the West, but it also has the economic and military weight to ensure the summit isn't a joke.
Okay, so we have the who and the where for you. Let's get into the how. This blueprint requires strict, quote, entry fees.
Non-negotiable entry fees.
Right. Nobody even boards a plane to Delhi until two conditions are met. First, an immediate, total cessation of all military operations.
Across the board.
No missile strikes, no drone attacks, no proxy skirmishes. Second, the Strait of Hormuz must be returned to its January 1st, 2026 status.
Meaning mines cleared, shipping lanes wide open.
Exactly. Now, how does the author justify asking for that up front?
The framing of these entry fees is crucial to understand. The author makes it very clear these are not concessions. Iran doesn't get a reward for stopping missile strikes. The baseline assumption of this summit is that nobody is allowed to negotiate while holding a knife to the throat of the global economy.
You can't negotiate under blackmail.
Right. Good faith requires dropping the weapons first.
But once the weapons are dropped and everyone lands in Delhi, the author introduces a ticking clock.
And it is a very fast clock.
3 days. That is the absolute maximum duration of this summit. No extensions, no multi-year working groups.
3 days, that's it?
How is that remotely realistic? I mean, we're talking about unwinding a 50-year geopolitical blood feud here. You can't even get a permit to build a shed in 3 days, let alone restructure the Middle East.
It sounds absurd, right?
Mm-hmm.
The author is highly aware of how crazy 3 days sounds, but they justify it through the lens of historical failure.
Explain that.
When diplomatic talks lack a hard deadline, the process itself becomes a substitute for a resolution.
Oh, so they just meet to meet.
Exactly. Negotiators just keep holding meetings to look busy while their home governments continue to enrich uranium or build missiles in the background.
The endless cycle of talks about talks.
Right. A draconian 3-day deadline forces decisions. It weaponizes urgency to kill bureaucratic procrastination.
Which leads right into the most shocking demand in this entire document.
Here we go.
Radical transparency.
Yeah.
The author insists that every single minute of this 3-day summit must be broadcast live, globally.
Everything.
No closed doors, no secret side deals. Wait, stop. I have to play devil's advocate here for our listeners.
Please do.
Broadcast it live, globally. That sounds like a reality TV nightmare. Wouldn't putting cameras in the room just force all these politicians to grandstand for your home audiences instead of actually compromising?
It's a very valid critique.
How does the author defend turning a survival summit into C-SPAN on steroids?
The grandstanding risk is real, obviously, but the author's counterargument is that secrecy is actually what kills diplomatic progress, particularly in authoritarian systems. Well, in Iran's domestic political environment, secrecy is a literal death sentence for reformist negotiators.
Wait, really?
Yes. If a deal is struck behind closed doors, the hardliners back in Tehran will instantly invent narratives of betrayal.
They'll just make up what happened in the room.
Exactly. They will claim the negotiators sold out the revolution, and because there's no public record of the actual give and take, the public has absolutely no way to verify the truth.
Ah, I see. So if the hardliners want to walk away from a deal that lifts crippling economic sanctions just to protect their ideological pride,
They have to do it on live television.
the Iranian public gets to watch them choose isolation over prosperity in real time.
Exactly. Transparency strips away the regime's ability to control the narrative.
That's fascinating.
And the same applies to the West, by the way.
True, yeah.
If a U.S. president makes a necessary but maybe unpopular compromise, secret talks allow their political opponents to scream about appeasement.
Right, because nobody saw why they made the compromise.
Exactly. But if the public watches the grueling step-by-step logic of the negotiation over those 3 days, it forces a shared reality.
You play with your cards face up.
Face up on the table, so nobody can accuse you of dealing from the bottom of the deck.
So let's look at the structure of these 3 days for you. Day 1 is opening positions. Day 2 is finding common ground. Day 3 is the resolution.
And the goal isn't a perfect utopian peace treaty.
No.
It's a binding interim agreement.
So let's look at what actually gets signed on Day 3. There are 2 main pillars to this core compromise.
Right.
The first is the nuclear freeze. The author calls this the verification currency. No enrichment beyond current levels, no new facilities, and full real-time audit trails by international inspectors.
Because trust does not exist at this table.
Zero trust.
Zero. The blueprint relies on the premise that in a low-trust environment, verification is the only currency that actually spends.
You have to prove it constantly.
The freeze is a mechanical necessity to buy time.
Oh.
You freeze the centrifuges so the Israelis and the Americans don't feel the ticking clock of a nuclear breakout.
Which prevents that drift into a preemptive strike that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It pauses the immediate threat.
But the freeze is just treating the symptom.
Huh.
The treatment for the systemic infection is the political pillar.
Yes.
And this is where the blueprint gets incredibly radical. It calls for the immediate formation of an interim government in Iran, headed by Reza Pahlavi.
Right.
But it is split exactly 50-50. Half the government is drawn from current regime technocrats and moderate reformists.
And the other half is drawn from the opposition and the diaspora.
Exactly.
This engineered balance is the absolute fulcrum of the entire political solution.
It's wild.
The author is trying to thread a nearly impossible needle here. How do you transition a country away from an authoritarian theocracy without plunging it into total failed state anarchy?
Right, because if you just tear everything down...
We've seen what happens when you just fire everyone in the existing power structure. Think about the de-Baathification of Iraq after 2003.
Oh, yeah, that was a disaster.
It led directly to an insurgency because hundreds of thousands of people with guns and institutional knowledge were suddenly unemployed and disenfranchised.
So the 50% drawn from the current regime acts as a stabilizing force here.
Exactly. They know how the electrical grid works. They know how the banking system operates. You keep the state functioning while decapitating the ideological leadership.
It's like forcing 2 rival CEOs to share a desk to keep the company from going under.
That's a great way to look at it.
Wow.
And just as importantly, it provides a face-saving off-ramp for the regime's massive bureaucratic apparatus.
An exit strategy.
Right. It tells them, you don't have to face a firing squad. You don't have to flee the country. You can keep your jobs and your pensions, but you have to share power.
I mean, I get the theory, I really do. But I'm having a hard time buying the practicality of this for a real-world scenario.
It's tough to swallow.
You're telling me that a mid-level regime technocrat is going to willingly share a desk with a dissident who has spent the last 10 years trying to overthrow them?
Yeah, it sounds crazy.
That sounds like instant terminal bureaucratic paralysis. How does anything actually get done?
It only works if the underlying rules of the system are changed simultaneously.
What do you mean?
You cannot put a new, balanced 50-50 government into an old, rigged institutional framework.
Because the old rules favored the old regime.
Exactly. If the old laws still apply, the hardliners will just use the legal system to crush the opposition half of the government.
Right.
This is why the blueprint demands the immediate enactment of an interim constitution.
Okay, let's look at how they dismantle the cage, as the author calls it.
Right.
This interim constitution immediately guarantees freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, equal rights for women, due process.
All the basics of a free society.
And it explicitly bans political executions and torture. But as you said, declaring those rights is totally meaningless if the institutions designed to suppress them are still functioning.
Yes.
The author demands the immediate dissolution of 3 specific bodies:
This is key.
the Majlis, which is the parliament, the Guardian Council, and the Assembly of Experts. I think we need to explain how these bodies actually function for our listeners, because otherwise it just sounds like an arbitrary reshuffling of acronyms.
It's vital to understand this. Take the Guardian Council, for example.
Okay.
In the current Iranian system, you can have elections, sure.
Yeah.
But the Guardian Council, which is heavily influenced by the supreme leader, has the absolute power to vet and veto any candidate, before they even get on the ballot.
So they decide who you're allowed to vote for.
Exactly. They act as an ideological filter.
Hmm.
If you don't dismantle the Guardian Council, any promise of free elections or a 50-50 government is a total fiction.
Because they'll just ban the opposition.
Right. They will simply disqualify anyone who doesn't toe the hardline ideological mark.
The author uses this brilliant metaphor here. You cannot renovate a cage into a home.
It's a powerful image.
It is. Trying to build a modern democratic government while leaving the Guardian Council intact is like trying to build a modern glass skyscraper on top of the foundation of a medieval dungeon.
It's structurally incompatible.
Completely. So those bodies are dissolved on day one, and this starts a 12-month countdown.
Right. During those 12 months, the interim government's primary job is keeping the country running and organizing elections for a constituent assembly.
And what does that assembly do?
That assembly will be tasked with drafting the new permanent constitution.
And crucially, during this entire 12-month transitional window, the nuclear program, ballistic missile development, and all support for proxy militias remain totally frozen.
Yes, that is vital.
Nobody can use the chaos of writing a constitution as camouflage to sprint toward a nuclear weapon.
Exactly. The U.S. and Israel are satisfied because the freeze is verified in real time.
And Iran is satisfied because they are finally moving toward international normalization and sanctions relief.
The architecture of the compromise is just meticulously balanced. It addresses the nuclear timeline, the regional security threat, and the internal crisis of legitimacy all at once.
It's a brilliant plan on paper.
It is.
But we have to address the massive, heavily armed elephant in the room here.
The enforcers.
Right. This all sounds incredibly pragmatic for diplomats sitting in New Delhi. But what happens when the men with the guns say no?
And they likely will.
We are talking about the IRGC. When the author calls the IRGC an economic empire, they aren't speaking metaphorically, right?
Not at all.
This isn't just a military branch that's going to quietly return to the barracks.
The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is arguably the most powerful economic actor in Iran.
Wow.
We're talking about a military organization that controls massive construction conglomerates like Khatam al-Anbiya. They have deep stakes in telecommunications, commercial airlines, shipping,
They're everywhere.
and the black market smuggling routes that bypass international sanctions. If you buy a cell phone plan or pay a toll on a major highway in Iran, there is a very good chance you are directly funding the IRGC.
So why on earth would the generals who control billions of dollars in off-the-books wealth agree to a 50-50 transitional government that will inevitably strip them of their monopolies?
They won't. They will reject it.
So the plan fails.
No, the author fully anticipates that rejection.
Yeah.
And if the IRGC blocks the transition, the blueprint doesn't fail. It simply shifts into Phase 2.
Okay, what is Phase 2?
Phase 2 relies on the asymmetric power of the Iranian diaspora.
Walk me through exactly how this works, because usually, when we think of a diaspora, we think of protests in London or Los Angeles raising awareness.
Holding signs, yeah.
But the author is talking about mobilizing them as a literal weapon to crash the system.
It's a coordinated strategy of dual pressure. The diaspora is millions strong and heavily concentrated in Western tech, finance, and academia.
Highly educated, highly networked.
Exactly. The blueprint outlines a strategy where they use digital and financial warfare against the IRGC's specific economic nodes.
How does that look on the ground?
We are talking about utilizing underground civic networks inside Iran to organize wildcat strikes in key industries.
Okay.
We are talking about tech workers in Silicon Valley helping to build decentralized communication networks that bypass the regime's internet blackouts.
So keeping the people connected when the regime tries to pull the plug.
Right. And financially, it means forensic accounting.
Oh, going after the money.
Yes. Diaspora finance experts, identifying the IRGC's shell companies in places like Dubai or Istanbul, naming and shaming them, and lobbying Western governments to freeze those specific assets.
You don't just protest the regime, you systematically defund its enforcement arm.
And this creates a devastating pincer movement.
Explain the pincer.
You have this internal domestic delegitimization being engineered by the diaspora and the citizens on the ground.
That's one side.
Right. Combined with the crushing external isolation of international sanctions that remain in place because the regime rejected the Delhi Compromise.
Ah, so they're squeezed from both sides.
Exactly.
This brings us to another incredible metaphor from the text for you to picture. The author compares regimes facing this kind of dual pressure to a hollow tree.
It's so vivid.
From the outside, the regime still looks terrifying. It has the riot gear, it has the guns, it stands tall.
It looks solid.
But internally, the rot has hollowed it out completely. It has no economic foundation left and zero ideological buy-in from the public.
It's empty inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When a state becomes politically weightless like that, it collapses under its own contradictions. It just takes one strong wind to push it over.
And if that collapse happens, the author notes that the timeline just compresses.
What do you mean?
You bypass the 50-50 interim stage entirely and move straight into an opposition-led transitional government.
So the destination remains exactly the same.
The destination remains the same. The IRGC's refusal merely dictates how painfully they are removed from the equation.
It's a brutal calculus.
Very brutal.
But it brings us to the ultimate question of this whole deep dive. We've gone through the mechanics, the leverage, the diaspora pressure, but why would the global community, the US, Europe, China, the Gulf states, invest so much political capital into this specific, incredibly risky plan?
Because it is unapologetically transactional.
Transactional, okay.
This isn't about global altruism or singing kumbaya around a campfire.
Yeah.
Every single actor at that table in Delhi walks away with a critical strategic vulnerability neutralized.
So let's run through that transactional checklist for our listeners.
Let's do it.
Israel gets a verifiable real-time freeze on the nuclear program, completely neutralizing the existential threat that keeps their defense establishment awake at night.
Huge win for them.
Massive. They also get a freeze on the proxy militias choking their borders. The United States gets regional de-escalation, allowing them to pivot resources elsewhere without getting sucked into another 20-year Middle Eastern occupation.
Right. And China and Europe get massive energy stability.
Which they desperately need.
Absolutely. A secure Strait of Hormuz means predictable oil and gas prices, which prevents global inflation spikes.
And Europe avoids a refugee crisis.
Exactly. They avoid the nightmare scenario of a regional war that would send millions of new refugees toward their borders.
The Gulf states get a reprieve from drone attacks on their oil infrastructure.
Right.
BRICS gets to flex its muscles as a legitimate guarantor of global security, proving they are a counterweight to American hegemony.
Everyone gets something.
And most importantly, the Iranian people get a genuine, structured pathway out from under an authoritarian theocracy.
The underlying psychology of this blueprint is what makes it so compelling, honestly.
How so?
The author notes that leaders often choose war because they feel they have no dignified alternative.
They're backed into a corner.
Exactly. When you back a regime into a corner and demand unconditional surrender, they will fight to the death because they have absolutely nothing to lose.
But this roadmap manufactures an exit ramp.
Yes. It gives the technocrats a way out that doesn't involve a firing squad.
But let's be real for a second. What if they refuse the exit ramp? What if the drift we talked about continues? The author paints a pretty chilling picture of the alternative.
They call it attrition through exhaustion.
Yeah.
If we reject bold diplomatic restructuring because it's too hard or too risky, we don't get stability. We get an endless, grinding escalation.
It's a slow bleed.
More shadow wars, more assassinations, more cyber attacks taking down civilian infrastructure.
More commercial vessels being seized in the Gulf.
Exactly.
The blueprint lays out the two inevitable endpoints of that attrition for you. Endpoint 1. Iran achieves a nuclear breakout.
Which is the nightmare scenario.
The author calls this a permanent instability engine. You enter a Cold War scenario in the Middle East, but with multiple unstable actors and zero guardrails.
It's terrifying.
And endpoint 2. Israel and the U.S. launch a massive preemptive war, reducing Iran's infrastructure to rubble. And what do you get then?
You don't get peace.
No. You get a devastated nation of 88 million people that becomes a permanent refugee generator and insurgency incubator.
Neither of those outcomes provides security for anyone.
Nobody wins.
They don't make Israel safer, they don't lower gas prices for the West, and they certainly don't liberate the Iranian people.
Under either scenario, as the text concludes, the Middle East ceases to be a functional region and becomes, quite simply, a wound.
A wound. That is a very heavy way to put
A
it.
permanent wound. It's a stark warning. The author is essentially screaming that time is out.
The clock has run down.
The era of secret, slow-moving, incremental diplomacy in Geneva or Vienna is dead.
It's over.
We need neutral ground in Delhi. We need an unbreakable 72-hour deadline.
We need the radical transparency of a live global broadcast.
We need the mechanical dismantling of ideological cages, and we need the mobilized power of the diaspora waiting in the wings.
It's a blueprint that demands we stop treating the symptoms with ice packs and finally perform the surgery required to cure this systemic infection.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider today.
Something to mull over.
We've spent this entire time dissecting this idea of radical transparency, forcing sworn enemies to negotiate the terms of their survival on live television, with the citizens watching every single move.
Face-up poker.
Right. In an age where global conflicts are so deeply intertwined with our daily lives, where a blocked strait spikes the cost of our groceries, and where a diaspora can mobilize a financial war via smartphones, has the traditional closed-door model of diplomacy become completely obsolete?
It's a question that challenges the entire foundation of statecraft.
It really does.
If secrecy only breeds conspiracy, and endless timelines only breed procrastination, perhaps this reality TV style of high-stakes diplomacy is the only way forward.
Could this model, the 72-hour clock, the live cameras, the 50-50 interim bridge, be applied to other frozen conflicts around the globe?
It's worth asking.
Or is it a uniquely extreme measure for a uniquely extreme crisis?
I think that's the real question.
The next time you see a news alert about diplomats meeting behind closed doors at a luxury resort to solve a crisis, ask yourself who really benefits from the cameras being turned off.
A great point to leave on.
Thank you for joining us as we unpack this incredible blueprint for you today. Keep questioning the narratives around you, and remember, sometimes the only way to defuse a bomb is to drag it out into the sunlight.